Our first episode for 2020 was on humor, something we talked about a lot throughout the year. We didn't know then, that we were about to step into this global pandemic, of course, and how much we were going to need outlets for our stress, like humor.
I know it. And, it was a timely conversation. It was one of those that we kind of think over the year, we're going, I guess we really did need to start off 2020 with a laugh because we had no idea what we were sliding into. But now, a year later, many of us are trying to navigate social re-entry, the economy, continued health issues, and more, and do this in a balanced manner. And it would really be nice if we could just have hit pause back then and restart our brains.
Yeah, that's exactly what our guests will help us understand as we talk about self-care, mindfulness, and how these tools promote healing and restore our well-being.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
We're joined by two guests. The first is Marty Height. Am I saying your name correctly?
Yes, just like if there was numbers in front of it. Height.
Awesome. A licensed professional counselor. Welcome, Marty.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
And in addition, we have Dr. Ellen Hampshire joining us. She has years of experience in public school setting as a school psychologist. But in addition to her multifaceted background, she's a yoga instructor.
Okay, actually, both of you have interesting personal stories. So in just 60 seconds each, starting with Marty, would you mind sharing the Cliff Notes version of your life and who you are?
Yeah, let's see here. I'm actually originally from Ohio. In Dayton, Ohio, and my dad's job kind of took us around. And so I bounced from Ohio to Pennsylvania to North Carolina, but made it to South Carolina for college and decided not to leave because I wanted to marry a South Carolina girl. And I majored in psychology, which doesn't get paid well. So I went to get my master's. And so I got a master's in counseling. And over the last little over a decade, I have been counseling, started out in the addictions field and am an addictions therapist, and then transitioned and was a clinic director for the Department of Mental Health for a period of time before just over a year ago transitioning to private practice, where now I deal with a very diverse population of people ranging in issues far and wide, but continue to have a soft spot in my heart for the chronically mentally ill and the addictions, where I kind of, cut my chops in learning. And so that's kind of the short way to the professional level. And then personally, I succeeded in marrying a South Carolina girl, and we are foster parents who have adopted two half brothers. And so since it's the Cliff Notes, I won't go into details of that because that's a powerful story on how that came to be. But now I'm a dad of a 14-year-old and a 5-year-old, and who knows what else is on the way.
Oh, wow. That's a great Cliff Notes version. That's awesome.
And a cliffhanger. I'm kind of like waiting for the rest of the story.
Right. We talked about adoption. What was it, about a year and a half ago? That was in the first year.
It was in the first year because you also are an adoptive dad.
Right. Ellen. Let's hear the Cliff Notes version of Ellen Hampshire.
All right, and I'm so happy to be here with you. So we have a little bit of overlap in the beginning. I grew up in Ohio, in Cincinnati, Ohio, not just down the road from Dayton, so very interesting, and married my high school sweetheart. And after we discovered we were pregnant at age 19, that was quite a shock, and also majored in psychology as an undergrad. Came across someone who told me about school psychology, and I had a little one, and I thought, well, working in the schools would work well with having a family, and it really interested me. And so I was a school psychologist for a number of years until my husband's job led us to South Carolina. And in the meantime, we had couple more little ones. So we had 3 and 3.5 years. We just decided, okay, if we're going to have kids, we're going to go for it. And then when I came to South Carolina, I continued as a school psychologist and provided some leadership with like reading intervention, those types of things. somehow decided to go back to get my doctorate in my 40s. And that led me to some additional leadership positions. So now in Greenville County Schools, it's called Multi-Tiered System of Supports Coordinator is my job title. But I basically help schools with using data, looking at their processes, but mostly fascinated with the social emotional aspect of our students and our teachers. And so I have spent a lot of time looking at converging my yoga side as an instructor with that field, and have really focused this year. It's been actually just kind of an interesting just way to be able to help teachers and students, during this difficult time, because I spent all that time with yoga, mindfulness, and social emotional learning, And then personally, I had a couple of grandkids along the way. So 3 little grandchildren. And so that's been a lot of fun too.
It's so exciting. I mean, I love, again, Holland and I find this all the time with our guests. Somehow there's usually a connection. So we're excited to introduce Marty and Ellen together and have these little connections. This is great. So because we're talking about some subjects that for some people may not be really familiar with, I've even heard a couple words already shared tonight, and just rapid fire. I don't care who takes the word, maybe both of you, but just give us a little overview of a couple terms. And the first one is mindfulness. What do we mean when we say that?
Well, I'll go first. My definition that I love is increased awareness with kindness and curiosity. I don't know if Marty has a different definition.
Listen, I can't top that. But when I coach and teach mindfulness, I just talk about being present in the moment. There's so many things that pull our attention in different directions. And when I'm trying to simplify it to somebody I'm working with, I say, listen, to be mindful is just to be present in the second, the minute, the hour that I'm living in, because that's all we're promised.
I love that. That's awesome. Both of you have just a nice, well-rounded approach to that. What about the word restorative?
I guess I can jump on this one first, I guess. When I think of restorative, again, I try to simplify things into everyday terms that people understand. And so I describe that as coming back to life, to bring back to a better place than to what it has become. And so that's pretty much it, to I guess, just to bring back to life.
I'm not going to top that.
That's a good one. A better place. I like that. How about reframe?
I think just shifting the meaning or a point of view around something that maybe you only saw in a certain way. So one of the things that we have adopted this year within our staff meetings is that we're going to suspend certainty. And I really love that, because that feeds into that idea of, we can turn, a concept 360 degrees and kind of look at some different perspectives.
I love that. Suspending certainty and reframing that. What about you, Marty? Anything else?
No, that's a really good way to look at it. When I think of reframing stuff, it's just shine a light on it from a different direction. That's how I kind of say it.
I had some pictures reframed a few months ago. They look totally different than they did when they were in the original frames.
That's a literal reframing.
Well, I know, but it's the same word. I mean, you use it in something you can touch, like a picture, but you also use it in, it's the same thing, right? It
right.
Completely changes. The picture is the same, but the way it looks is totally different.
Absolutely.
It makes me think of how we only see life through our eyes. It's the only way we're capable of seeing life. And so to reframe is to sometimes offer a view of life through a different set of eyes.
One of the stories that came to mind when I was thinking about reframing I was talking to my sister, and she was helping coach her stepdaughters about approaching their mother on a difficult topic. And they were very concerned about that she was going to respond this way. And my sister said, okay, but what else could be true? And they were able to explore some different paths. And I really liked that way of asking, how can you reframe that?
Mm-hmm. What else could be true? Are there options?
Yeah.
Very good. How about this word decentering?
Decentering. That sounds like a good word for a yoga expert, but decentering, it's somewhat self kind of defining, I think, and that it's when we get off base. You mentioned during the introductions, Amy, that like talking about finding balance in a world of chaos. And so oftentimes I find myself thinking in the concept of balance. Life is all these different balances. And when we get off balance, we become decentered. We become kind of, it's like when you get pushed and you're kind of like barely standing on one leg and it's kind of hit or miss whether you're going to fall or not. It's kind of that idea of just kind of getting off base. And that's how I think about decentering.
Excellent. I bet you're right. The yoga instructor may have some.
Well, when I teach yoga, I talk about just observing your thoughts as clouds in the sky, and in doing so, not attaching to them. So sometimes some of our thoughts, they come into our minds, and we invite them to take a seat and really be a part of our life. And do we really need to do that, or can we just say, okay, that's a thought that's here, I see it, and I'm going to let it go on.
I love that. All right. I know we've heard this a lot especially lately, the word affirmation, but break it down for all of us who may just need to have a better understanding.
Well, I just see it as being validated, having the type of emotional support. We all have needs, and it's hard for us often to say, this is what I need. And in fact, in the height of our COVID in the spring, it was something that I realized I needed to do with my family, is to say, what are you experiencing this week? And what is it you need from each other? And a lot of it is just having that emotional support, and but also hearing, I'm acknowledging your presence in my life.
When I think of affirmation, the first thing that pops in my head is to confirm what is true. We live in a world that breeds itself on clickbait and divisiveness. And then even working with people, they present themselves in and sometimes mixed messages that are hard to decipher. And so I think there's a challenge. If you really want to stand out, the challenge is looking at the person in front of you that you may or may not agree with and say, I can affirm what I see to be true with you. And I've found that it's a powerful tool, because it allows us to start connecting on what we agree on, and it also serves as a validation. Like, I see you, I hear you, this is valid, this is true, and I see it. And so a good affirmation serves a lot of different things, whether it be an encouragement or just support. It's just to acknowledge what is true in front of you in that moment.
I love that. That's excellent. Thank you so much. That really helps us get into the mindset, if you will, of what we're going to be talking about tonight.
All right. As we start thinking about self-care, the counselor that I see is always telling me self-care is not selfish. On the contrary, when conducted holistically, self-care is one way to promote connection and care for others. And in researching this episode, we discovered that there are studies that explain that those who develop the practice of self-care have a better quality of life, are admitted to the hospital less frequently, and live longer. How would you help someone begin applying self-care to daily routines? Can we start with you, Ellen, and then move to Marty?
Absolutely. So there's I heard a great little podcast on this about tiny habits and making sure that you're matching your self-care routine or any new behaviors to things like your level of motivation, et cetera. So you start with just taking very small steps. You look at your daily routine and say, okay, what is something I do every day where I can fit it in right there? So it becomes automatic. You don't have to think about it. So before a certain meal, before, you go to bed or after you wake up, paying attention to your energy levels during the day so that okay, I'm more likely to do it, at night or in the morning if I have more or less energy during those times. And then in addition to that, it's really important to reinforce, to recognize what you're doing. And so it could be that you do a little dance or you have a little motion you do. But what I do is while I'm walking out in nature, I think to myself, I am helping myself physically and mentally. And in turn, I am helping all the people around me. And that reinforces that activity.
All right. So I think Ellen hit the nail on the head. I don't dance. That is not how I personally reinforce it. But if I was talking to somebody trying to encourage self-care, it's the baby steps. You can't undervalue small changes. There's an amazing movie from the 90s called What About Bob? And in that movie, it's literally about baby steps and the actor whose name slips me now, but that's literally all he does is baby steps, because we live in a world that like large swings at things, right? What is a New Year's resolution? It's let me change all of my life always overnight forever. Amen. Like it's impossible, and so sometimes it's just the small step. But once you've determined what that small step is, it's the reinforcement piece, which I'm a huge fan of. I call them ticklers. Create ticklers for yourself that remind you. And so, for example, sticky notes on the mirror in your bathroom, right? My wife used to write messages to herself on her rearview mirror, so that every time she looked at it, she was reinforcing what it was that she was doing. And I thought that was awesome. I set alerts on my phone. And so like I have a daily reflection I try to do. And no matter how much I want to do it, I often forget. So every morning at 9 a.m., I get an alert that says, hey, don't forget to do this, And so to get somebody doing it, number one, they have to want it. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to want the change. But then you just have to get creative. Like, what game can I play with myself to get me start doing this small change? And once I've incorporated that change, well, then what's the next one? What's the next baby step? And then pretty soon, it's kind of like the tortoise and the hare. Those small changes add up, and pretty soon you've accomplished the goal.
I'm reminded of something James Clear says. I think it's in Atomic Habits. We do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. Is that what you're expressing? Absolutely.
I mean, if we naturally did all of these good things we're talking about, we wouldn't have to talk about changing. The fact that we're
have a career, right? Your entire profession.
Right.
This.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I like the fact that people are messed up because it pays my bills, but it's not what I want for people.
I think too, you have to start with a message that I am worthy. If you don't believe that you're worthy, then that shame or whatever is that your barrier is going to interfere every single time.
That is a huge point. That is so true. How often do we self-sabotage? Because at the end of the day, we don't think we're capable, worthy, able. That's a really good point.
So if you're saying that to yourself and you feel some resistance, keep saying it and break down, cry, whatever. Keep saying it until you believe it's true.
Wow, these are such good strategies and tools. And I love even just the different verbiage that are used, whether it's tiny habits or baby steps or little bits of reinforcement or ticklers, whatever it may be. I love these. These are very, very practical. Well, there was some more research by someone at the University or Washington University in St. Louis, and he helped track this phenomena in the brain. They noticed that when people let their minds wander and they were laying down in an fMRI scanner, then the brain patterns operated in sync rather than in these isolated specific regions. And the term is called the default mode network, or DMN. And I would love to hear from both of you, and we'll just kind of reverse the order. Ellen, I'm going to start with you first. What are the benefits of being still and allowing the brain to rest? And then piggyback on that, what are some strategies to help us be more aware of that during the day?
Okay, so starting with the benefits, it actually helps us with our attention and focus. I talk to educators all the time about simple ways to recognize how we can explain to students even the parts of the brain and how they operate, and that if we are emotional, if we're feeling that chaos in our brain, etc., then it's very difficult for us to be in the state of mind where is optimal for learning, of course, and even optimal for having a conversation, right? So it helps that attention and focus. It helps just your overall mood. It helps your productivity. Back when I was doing my dissertation, and that was like really challenging, and I would get feedback from, my chair, and it was marked up all over the place after I had pored over this hours and hours and hours. And I just would have these brain blocks, and I would go and do yoga. And during the yoga practice, I could just see some of my ideas coming, forth, etc. So it really slows your brain down so that you can channel your intellect in a better way. And then ways to do that. You want me to go ahead with that part? Okay. So, I just mentioned yoga. I happen to be somebody who really needs a good amount of physical activity. So you have to pay attention and maybe even track, notice your moods according to physical activity, sleep, that type of thing. There's a free little app that I use called Bearable, like the animal. And and you can just put in what your mood is, and you can start making notes about what you did. But I have noticed if I don't exert a certain amount of energy, then it's harder for me to settle down and engage in some mindfulness work. So, and that could even be, being outside and doing yard work like I did just this, and that really lets your brain wander. Walking is great. Nature is very healthy for you. It is a great way to relieve your stress. There's lots of nice little tools online. Like there's a Calm challenge that's free. Calm is something you can pay for, but there's a 30-day Calm challenge that you can access, and it very gradually takes you through some mindfulness tasks. One example would be doing some senses work. So SENSES. So looking around, finding 5 objects. So really being present where you are in that way. 4, finding 4 details visually. Closing your eyes. 3, hearing 3 sounds. 2 would be maybe identifying 2 feelings. So I can feel my legs on the chair. I can feel my breath in my body. 1 could be an intention or a smell or a taste, So you can see how when Marty was talking about that really being present, that allows you to really take in your environment. So just a few examples.
I love those. And that segues right nicely into from what we already had on one of our earlier podcast episodes this year was talking about being outdoors and the benefits of being in nature right now. So that's great. How about you, Marty?
Yeah. what we're talking about is the process of becoming congruent within ourselves, right? And so you've got kind of like, to oversimplify it, you've got two things going on in your mind at any given time: active processing and stored processing. So what happens is when we experience life, it's coming into us real time, right? Like the senses that we just talked about. We're touching, seeing, feeling, right? And so we're constantly overloaded with active processing while also having stored processing, previous stuff that's still rolling around. And so what happens is when we're stressed, overwhelmed, have been through a difficult time, we're having a hard day, we're still real time having to practice, but we're not congruent with the rest of our mind because there's a lot of other static rolling around. And when that happens, we're distracted, we're irritable, we have a short fuse, we feel moody, feel depressed, anxious, you name it, right? All these things that we deem kind of negative, which they are negative in our experience of them. But this is what I try, going back to that idea of balance. I tell people, when you feel this way, allow it to tell you that you're out of balance. And you want to become congruent, because when we're congruent, you have the ability to be present. I'll give you an example, kind of a litmus test to how to judge this. What do you do in the 5 minutes leading up to when you go to sleep? Somebody that's out of balance, that's incongruent, will either distract themselves on like YouTube until they're so exhausted they pass out, take medication to forego that process, or do they lay there and are able to calmly reflect on the day, be at peace within themselves, and drift off to sleep? That is the moment when we're starting to drift off to sleep that our prefrontal cortex is going to shut down, right? That's the thinking, the executive part of our mind. It's literally right beyond your forehead. And that emotional processing raw brain is still rocking and rolling. And if there's an incongruence there, if there is static that we have not made peace with, it's going to come flooding forward. And so often when I'm talking to somebody who's feeling depressed or anxious or overwhelmed or you name it, I'll say, what happens right before you go to sleep? And I've got a guy I'm thinking of right now who says, I distract myself with YouTube because if not, I just want to cry. You know, and so it shows this unresolved emotional energy that's still there. The next half is, how do you reconcile that? How do you develop congruence from incongruence? And I'm kind of conceptual in that I don't know, call it philosophical. I like to paint the problem and let you figure out the fix for it, right? And so, because every person is unique, right? If you've met one person in this world, you've met one person in this world, right? Everybody's different. So the challenge is, what helps you make peace within yourself? What makes you? Now, there's some things that are universally helpful for people. Meditative practices, right? Whether that be prayer, yoga, meditation, a quiet time, a walk in nature. Like peace and quiet tends to be restorative, in the same way that physical exercise tends to be restorative. Food habits, sleep patterns, those are things that are universally restorative to people that create congruence. But at the end of the day, you. If you know something's out of whack, do you need to write about it? Do you need to talk about it? Do you need to run it out of you? You know, what is it that works for you? Because my guess is if you're out of balance, you can look back and say, I used to do this and I'm not doing it. And maybe I need to do it again.
Honestly, I feel like we owe both Marty and Ellen just a huge round of applause for all of these answers, because this has been so helpful. I'm so grateful to have this conversation tonight.
Right? This is free therapy.
It's free?
We're about to wind up this first half of the episode. And one question to sort of encapsulate everything we've talked about. What is the one key element we need to know to understand self-care? Marty, how about we start with you and then we'll let Ellen conclude.
Yeah, I'm going to say intentionality. We live in a world of instant gratification. Don't think about it. As soon as you need it, go get it. To be healthy, it takes a level of discipline. You think back 50, 75, 100 years, a lot of these things that we now have to schedule came naturally, right? Electricity wasn't around, so we just sat on the porch and went to bed at a reasonable time, right? Like these processing things used to be taken for granted that we now have to schedule, because you could stay up all night if you wanted to. You can be distracted if you wanted to. You have to be intentional about being healthy. And when I say be healthy, I look at 4 areas. You need to be physically healthy, right? Doesn't mean you need to be a marathon runner, but you need to be active, right? Like I sit on my behind all day long. I have to schedule time to be physical, right? So physically healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, and psychologically healthy. Like there are key cornerstones to being healthy. I recently heard it as they're the 4 wheels on a bus. And if you want that bus to move forward well, then all 4 of them need your attention. So I would say intentionality.
So give me those 4 wheels again, would you?
Sure. Physical health, emotional health, psychological health, and spiritual health.
Would you do me a favor and distinguish between psychological and emotional health?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so emotional health is, you got to realize all these things overlap to a degree, but emotional health has to do with our relationships. It has to do with our mood. It has to do with how our, to use a psychological term, how our amygdala and our limbic system is functioning. It has, whereas psychological health may have to do also with those things. They complement each other well. But then on the psychological side, it may have to do with some other levels of functioning, whether it be mental illness or disorders, or having a healthy routine and practices. Like you can have a very healthy and disciplined routine and get good sleep, but still be an emotional nightmare, right? And so there's the way that our brain functions, but then there's also the emotional practices and processes and the relationships that kind of tie in. So psychological and emotional, I would say, complement each other closely, but there's a difference between the two as well.
Ellen.
Okay. When I originally was thinking about this, I had said that we need to believe that we are worthy. So I had jumped ahead with that. But when Marty was talking about that health aspect, I honestly don't always love to call it self-care. I've heard squad care and community care, but this is just healthy behaviors. You know, this, because so many people hear self-care and think maybe self-indulgence, selfishness, etc. But it's just engaging in healthy behaviors. And if you look at it in a community collective aspect, then you're going to see this work reverberating all around you.
That's great. All right, I'm going to cancel my appointment with my therapist this week and send me.
This has been awesome. I'm so glad we have a part 2 to this conversation.
Right? I'm looking forward to it. So special thanks to Ellen and Marty. This is such a needed conversation, especially right now as we're starting to emerge from the pandemic. While you wait for part 2, please go to the afterwordpodcast.com and become a subscriber. You can leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to tell your friends about us. And as always, you are welcome at our table.